know that Imam Husayn agreed a treaty with Muawiyah. Part of that treaty was that Muawiyah would not seek to appoint a successor after him. That was fundamental to the agreement that Husayn had made with him. And we know that after Imam Husayn died, his brother Imam Husayn preserved that treaty. He kept the word of his brother. Now, it's important for us just to consider for a moment. Husayn was an imam, therefore he was masoom, therefore he was without error. And so, without error, he had entered into this treaty with Muawiyah. How could it then be that Imam Husayn would fail to keep that treaty? How could it be that he would break it? Because he himself was masoom, without error. If Husayn has done the will of God in entering into that treaty, then Husayn will do the will of God in supporting and remaining bound by that treaty. And so it was for the first period of the imamate of Husayn. But the treaty was finally broken. And the treaty was broken when Muawiyah decided that he would appoint his son Yazid as the caliph after him. Now, Muawiyah was not a man of the greatest reputation for piety and upright living, but Yazid was a byword for breaking the code of practice of Islam, which had been inherited from the Quran, from the Prophet. We know that he lived a life that was far away from the teaching of the Quran, both in piety, his own personal life, in his relationship with other people, in his handling of public affairs, and in his handling of money. And this was the man that Muawiyah decided to appoint to be his successor as the caliph, as the leader of the community. What was Imam Husayn to do? The treaty had been broken. Any weak person will always seek to strengthen their position by forcing other people to support them, by putting them under an obligation of support, and by bullying them, by cajoling them, if necessary, using violence to make sure that they will give a declaration of allegiance to the bully. Now, Yazid was such a bully, and he needed the support of members of the community in order to bolster his position as the caliph in succession to his father. He especially needed the support of the leaders of that community, the leading people to whom others would look. And if they would not give their support, then they should be bullied and coerced into doing so. And if they would not do so, then they were to be killed, because Yazid could not tolerate any opposition to his taking power within the community. Therefore, one of the first things that he does once he assumes responsibility and power at the death of his father is to start sending out agents to demand an oath of allegiance from the leading people of the community. The agents begin to go through the community seeking out people of influence, Obviously, one of the people of influence was Imam Husayn himself. It's important to remember that if Muawiyah had abided by the terms of the treaty, then a shura, a consultative, consent-seeking group would have been formed of the leading people in the community in order to resolve the succession. Surely Husayn would have been one of those people. Therefore, to leave Husayn free was to give an opportunity for him to oppose Yazid. Yazid could not tolerate that, and therefore he gave orders that Imam Husayn was to be put on the spot. He was to be made publicly to pledge allegiance to Yazid. And of course, the penalty for not doing so was the penalty of death. Now, what was Husayn to do? Because the eyes of all the people of the Muslim community would look to him. He was the living member of the Ahl al-Bayt. He was the successor to the Prophet and to that line of Imams coming down through Ali and Hassan. If he had given in to Yazid, if he had given in to that tyranny, then of course other people would have done the same. They would have said, if it's okay for Yazid, they would have said, if it's okay for Husayn to recognize the leadership of Yazid, then it's okay for us too. And in this way, the whole thing would have been lost. What is at stake here is not the political position of Imam Husayn. It's something much more important than that. He is not struggling for his own political position, but rather he is struggling for the purity of the message of Islam. He is struggling to bring people back to that straight path which was laid down by the Quran and by the Sunnah of the Prophet, and which was again straightened by his father Ali. The consequence then of not bringing people back to that straight path was that they would go astray, and that they would go further and further astray by living under tyranny and under oppression. That Imam Husayn could not tolerate. He could not allow that the people would be taken away into falsehood. There is a hadith recorded from the Prophet Muhammad, and it tells us the greatest jihad is to speak the word of truth into the face of the tyrant. Now, I think that this hadith must have been very prominent in the mind of Imam Husayn at this time, because he was now facing the tyrant in the person of Yazid, and he would have to take a stand. He would have to resist the onward march of evil, the onward march of deviating people away from the path of Islam. This would be his duty. This would be his inner struggle within himself, that he would have to speak the word of truth against Yazid. And so there was no way that he was giving an oath of allegiance to such a person. Remember that Yazid was a despot, if you like. It was known that even his friends and companions who would be with him before the time of his taking over leadership of the community, even they said to him, Yazid, you will have to reform your life if you are to take on from your father as the leader of the community. So even they could see what was the character of the person. And we know that all manner of immorality, all manner of waywardness from the guidance of Islam was the normal way of life for Yazid. Now this is the burden of leadership. If the leader is corrupt, what then can the people expect? What can the people hope for? Shakespeare has a very important saying in this regard. He says, what are we to do when the hand that holds the power is in itself corrupt? This is the situation that Imam Husayn faces. Here is the power in the hand of Yazid. He now controls the army of his father. All his wealth, all his position, all his status hinges on him holding on to that power. Not only himself, but also his clan, the Umayyads. When the Umayyads first took power, the leader of the Umayyad clan is reported to have said, now that you have power, be like boys with a ball, pass it around amongst yourselves. So it was clear that from the beginning, the desire was to establish a dynasty that would hold power within its hands, not for the good of the Muslim community as a whole, not for the good and the glory of God, but in order to hold that power which was the key to wealth, which was the key to corruption in their own way of life, and corruption in the public life of the community. Financial corruption as well as moral corruption. Now again, what is the duty? What is the burden of leadership? Because Imam Husayn knows himself to be the divinely appointed leader of the community. He knows that the eyes of everyone will be looking to him. He sees the way in which leadership is being abused by Yazid and by his cohort of Umayyads, and he knows that he must take a stand and must make a decision. It was then in this way that Imam Husayn grows, not just in spiritual stature, but in political stature too, because now he is to take a stand in the public life of the community so that others can look to him and see him refusing to give an oath of allegiance to the tyrant. But at the same time, he knows that if he does this in such a way that provokes a rebellion, that provokes an uprising amongst the people, many innocent people will lose their lives. And so we see again this tendency which is there throughout the Ahl al-Bayt, from the time of the Prophet, who sought to avoid bloodshed whenever it was possible. From the time of Imam Ali, although he was a warrior and had to engage in fighting, if at all possible, he would prefer to negotiate, to go for arbitration, to save the lives of people. The lives of people are so important. And again we see in Imam Hassan that he was prepared to withdraw from political power to spare the Muslim community from bloodshed. Now again, the question that is facing Husayn, he must take a stand against tyranny, but he must seek in every way to do that which spares the lives of people, and that is the task that lies before him.